Good morning. Typically for many French cars, the second-generation Citroen C5 is very well protected against corrosion. Accident-free models, including the first years, should have no major problems with it. Some buyers have slightly worse opinions about the paintwork, pointing to chipping paint on the wheel arches and sills. Generally, however, there is nothing to be ashamed of compared to the competition. The interior receives slightly worse reviews in terms of build quality. The dashboard as a whole is a large, single element, covered in leather in the top versions, which eliminates any potential crackling, but the same cannot be said about the door panels. They can make life a bit unpleasant with minor noises. Owners of such cars also speak less favorably about the interior finishing details, which are not very durable. In this category, the most noticeable thing is the rubbing silver finish of the unusual steering wheel. With a stationary center, only its rim rotates. Many people have comments about the door seals. Not only are they delicate, but they are also expensive. Electrics and electronics are generally considered to be quite stable. Although in the last year or two, the opinion of users and electromechanics in this category has deteriorated somewhat, it is not something to be particularly afraid of. Failures usually concern minor issues. Parking sensors, door lock sensors, or tire pressure sensors may be damaged. Occasionally, there are faults related to rusty and corroded electrical components. The Citroen C5 was offered with two types of suspension, conventional and hydropneumatic, available in the two highest equipment versions, Comfort and Exclusive, and in the visually off-road estate called Cross Tour. The mechanical suspension elements, for example wishbones or subframes, are identical in all C5, and in the case of most elements interchangeable with those of the Peugeot 407. In the top C5s, the standard springs and shock absorbers are replaced with hydropneumatic struts, which of course cooperate with the other elements of the hydropneumatic installation. The Hydractive 3 Plus suspension, in addition to the possibility of height adjustment, has the advantage that it maintains the same ground clearance regardless of the car's load. Contrary to appearances, the Hydractive 3 Plus suspension is not discouraged. Quite the opposite. Its durability positively surprises many people. Although sometimes there are problems related to leaks from the installation. Minor sweating is the norm. The problem, however, is the issue of service. Not everyone wants to undertake servicing this system characteristic of Citroën, and taking such a C5 to a workshop of questionable reputation is a bit like Russian roulette. The basic suspension also has nothing to be ashamed of in terms of durability, and this despite the fact that the multi-link system can be found not only at the rear, but also at the front. There are no traditional McPherson struts here. Apart from occasional problems with rusty calipers, the braking system does not experience any faults very often, although due to the considerable weight of the car, almost 1,600 kilograms in the basic version, the brake discs and pads wear out quickly, and there is also some whacking of the discs that can be felt on the steering wheel. The C5 can have a traditional or electromechanical parking brake. The latter is present in models with hydropneumatic suspension. In both cases, users generally do not report any complaints about the operation of these brakes. The petrol engines of the Citroen C5 should be divided into two groups, those offered before the 2010 facelift and those after the facelift, although this is a somewhat simplified division. The first group includes 1.8 and 2.0 16 volts units, as well as the 211 horsepower 3.0 volts 6. Newer C5 models hide 1.6 engines under the hood, naturally aspirated VTI, or turbocharged THP. Here it becomes clear why the aforementioned division is simplified. 1.6 THP units were installed from April 2009. The basic rule that people interested in the petrol C5 should follow is as follows. Only the older, naturally aspirated models are worth considering. This is due to the fact that the 1.6 engines developed together with BMW either offer absolutely nothing interesting and are not particularly reliable, VTI, or have reasonable performance, but also a failure rate that is not suitable not only for a mid-range car, but for any car at all, THP. A common problem of VTI and THP engines is the timing drive. Although it is implemented using a theoretically durable and maintenance-free solution, which is a chain, the reality is usually less rosy. The chain tensioners in these engines are defective, which in extreme cases can lead to the chain jumping by a few teeth on the gears. This can result in the pistons colliding with the valves and the need to overhaul the cylinder head. Both engines also have problems with increased oil consumption, which also threatens the need to overhaul the cylinder head. The reason in this case is that the valves can get stuck in the guides. VTI adds to the list problems with variable valve timing, which are the result of chain stretching and ignition coils, while THP turbocharger failures and fragile manifolds, both intake and exhaust. The naturally aspirated 1.8 and 2.0 units belong to the older EW family and are similar in terms of design. The 140 horsepower 2.0 is considered a much better choice for this heavy car, but in practice, both engines do not cause any major problems, are cheap to repair, and are the best of the entire range for LPG. The 3.0 V6 engine also receives good reviews, but in its case you can't count on low operating costs, especially since it was only combined with an automatic gearbox. It will not be easy to find such a C5. We have already had the opportunity to familiarize ourselves with some of the C5 diesel engines in the previous text on the Ford Mondeo. It is no secret that the HDI units, designated by Ford as TDCI, were designed jointly by the PSA Group and the Blue Oval. The Citroen C5 was fitted with a whole range of diesel engines. The weakest in the range were the 1.6 HDI versions, power from 109 to 114 HP. In older models, they were equipped with 4 valves per cylinder, and in newer models, 2, after 2010. Newer versions are considered to be slightly more durable, but the condition of the turbocharger should be taken into account in all models with these engines. The culprit of faults is often the pipe supplying oil to the turbocharger. Its periodic preventative replacement is recommended. A clogged sieve catching dirt is also indicated. In addition, it is worth considering the washers under the injectors. When they are worn, the passenger compartment smells of diesel oil. Another suggestion is the well-known and recommended 2.0 HDI engines. In this case, the power spectrum is between 136 and 180 HP. The problems that can be encountered in their case do not differ significantly from the class standard. Injectors, exhaust gas recirculation valve, EGR, or high-pressure pump may be damaged. Sometimes dual-mass flywheels fail. Occasionally, there are problems with starting and running the engine in winter. The 2.2 HDI unit is structurally related to the 2.0 and has similar problems, although some sources also indicate an increased risk of turbine or common rail system component failure. In addition, the 2.2 engine is more expensive to service and repair than the 2.0 version, so few people decide to buy it. The bi-turbo variant in particular belongs to the higher risk group. Note, the 2.2 170 HP is a bi-turbo, and the 2.2 204 HP is a single turbo. The French know how to make things confusing. At the top of the range of diesel engines are the V6 units. Initially, a 2.7 engine was used, then replaced by a larger 3.0. The 2.7 does not deserve a recommendation due to its failure rate, problems with bearing shells, connecting rods, turbochargers, and burnt pistons, and the nightmarish repair costs. The 3.0, despite its larger capacity and power, is not only a slightly more economical engine, if you can say that about a 3-liter diesel in a mid-range car, but also slightly more durable. Opinions on it are so divided, however, that it is difficult to recommend it with a clear conscience. Particulate filters cause relatively few problems. The C5 used so-called wet filters, which required periodic top-ups of Aeolus fluid, which lowers the temperature needed to burn off soot from the filter. This is a certain inconvenience compared to dry filters, but cars with wet filters seem to cope a bit better in city conditions. The fluid is dosed automatically and helps burn off soot even when we are not driving on the road. The Citroen C5 was produced with several types of gearboxes. Their types and designations differ depending on the engine version, but in a simplified way, the division can be limited to 5 and 6-speed manual gearboxes, 4 and 6-speed automatics, and the 6-speed automated manual gearbox EGS6. Problems with standard manual gearboxes are basically unheard of. The 4-speed automatic transmission 20TS2820 TS60 was installed on request only in the C5 with a 2-liter petrol engine, so it is not a frequent guest on the secondary market. It does not matter. It significantly worsens performance, acceleration to 100 km per hour in about 2s, and increases fuel consumption, and in addition, it occasionally bothers users with problems, e.g., a non-functional kickdown function or damaged solenoid valves. There were several different 6-speed automatics, AM6, AT6, EAT6, but all of them are similar in design to ASINs. These gearboxes have their fans, but they don't work particularly quickly, and sometimes have problems with changing gears and durability in the broad sense. Unfortunately, they are far from being the best designs on the market. This is a topic for a separate post. Among C5 users with automatic transmissions, there are frequent discussions about changing the oil in these gearboxes. Few people follow this, and this generates problems. The EGS6 gearbox was combined with the 1.6 VTI and 1.6 HDI engines. Traditionally, for automated transmissions, it doesn't offer anything particularly interesting. For example, it sometimes jerks when changing gear. The more violently, the harder we accelerate. Over time, the clutch decalibrates. All Citroen C5 engine versions have front-wheel drive. Mechanics point out relatively frequent failures of differential mechanisms. They can howl quite loudly, which is most likely the result of significant oil losses, leaks. You can definitely sign under this statement. The Citroen C5 is not only one of the most durable and successful Citroens of recent years, but also one of the more interesting offers on the secondary market. A significant advantage of the car is the successful and quite durable hydropneumatic suspension, although it should be remembered that not every model has it. Unfortunately, the C5 is a moderately interesting proposition for petrol car enthusiasts. Newer versions should be avoided, especially the turbocharged 1.6 THP, and older ones can be quite worn out. In addition, not every model has a spare wheel well, so those interested in installing LPG should look into this issue before buying a given model. A better situation awaits diesel fans, provided they choose the popular 2.0 HDI engine. The 1.6 is successful but too weak, and larger power units, preferably the 2.7 and 3.0 V6 HDI, generate considerable costs. Those interested in automatic transmissions should think twice before buying. Several different types of such boxes were used in the C5, but none of them deserves a clear recommendation. If the previous owner did not change the oil, we will pay for his neglect. If the need to maintain an appropriate maintenance regime doesn't scare you, it's definitely worth looking around for a well-maintained Citroen, especially since you won't have to dig through dozens of fleet cars, as is the case with the Opel Insignia and Ford Mondeo. And if you know of any common errors, your comments are welcome.